What's up, YouTube? Welcome back to the Rat's Den. Thanks for joining in. Today I wanted to talk about the story mode and my thoughts on how the roster reflects it. So looking at the roster here, I have a huge gripe and complaint towards it. Most of all, I'm appreciative of what we have here, but I feel like there are probably some holes in what I mentioned in my past videos. But first, I wanted to kind of go over MK11's original roster. And what you're seeing here is it's the base roster of when MK11 first released. And I really don't have any complaints about the roster in terms of how it's related to the overall story of MK11. There's not a single character on this list here that didn't seem to play some sort of a small role within the story itself. We engaged every character on this roster right here, and them being on the main roster was a pretty solid experience of what we're seeing in the story itself. And what I mean is if you go into the movie scenes, the cut scenes, and you try to find these characters, you're pretty much going to find them. The only thing that I would say that did not make sense and that I would say was a letdown is the fact that we didn't get to see Sector and Cyrax as playable characters. But a solid foundation here on the base roster in general. On a side note, I would say that there was a cameo appearance within the story itself before DLC that we did see Shiva, but we never fought against her. And she was just kind of an honorable mention along the story, and later she was fleshed out to a full story side character in the DLC. Looking at the base roster here and trying to reflect it back to the story, I feel it made the perfect sense, right? There's not a character on this list that I'm seeing which didn't give some substance to the story itself. Now, going back to MK1, even though I did enjoy the story very much, a lot of the characters that we see on the base roster were not fully fleshed out to the point where we do interact in the story mode in MK1, we see some other characters that might be more deserving of being on the base roster. This is highly opinionated, but I'm going to start off with this. I believe that Rain, Reiko, Nitarra, and Havik, all four of these characters did not play a high enough a role for them to be on the base roster. Reiko, in the very beginning, he did compete against Raiden in the Mortal Kombat tournament, but after that, it just kind of tapers off. You don't really see a big, heavy importance to his role. Same thing with Rain here. I don't see him a heavy role in terms of who he meant to be as part of the base roster. Yet again, this is highly opinionated on my end. I'm welcome to comments, but I think that these two people on the roster, they shouldn't have been part of the main roster. And if I was to replace them with two characters who are more deserving in terms of story, I think it would definitely have to be Quan Chi and Ermac. First of all, Quan Chi was a significant spot in the story. He had a huge role throughout most of the story of the game. And I feel like that makes him a big part of having a spot on the roster itself. And Ermac as well, I feel like he had a more magnifying moment to the story alone, to the point where Johnny Cage is like, oh wow, that's Soul NATO, right? Like it made it a big thing. If you think about Reiko and his introduction, we're hearing Shao Kahn talk about Reiko, and it just doesn't feel like he earned a spot on the roster. But the next two sets of characters, Nitarra and Havik, those two characters, again, I feel the same sentiment in that we barely saw anything from Nitarra to be substantial as far as being a base part of the roster. I would not have minded these two characters having a cameo appearance like Shiva did in MK11, and then going back and adding them as DLC characters down the line. I'm not saying that any of these characters are horrible characters. I'm still early and I have only played pretty much only one character this entire time, but I've went through the whole story, and even if you did add Quan Chi and Ermac to this base roster, then I feel then that would be a complete picture of the overall game itself. Some small gripes to mention here as far as placement of the characters. I feel like they tried to pair all the ninjas here. They do have Smoke, Scorpion, and Sub-Zero as part of the story, and they do also have, you know, Raid. All these 4 characters here, they make sense in terms of their relationship being together, and I recognize that, right? And I feel like that's right. I feel like Reptile, on the other hand, never interacted with these ninjas here, and they just wanted to say, okay, all your ninjas are here. On the same note, Rain is right next to the ninjas as well, right? I know that Tanya and Rain are supposed to be Melina's guard or whatever, and I guess that does make sense, but I still feel that Lee May had more of a relationship toward these characters here than Rain did. So I would have moved Lee May over here because Lee May doesn't seem to have a big relationship here, this respect here. You could say that the Ashra, Nitarra, and Havik all belong in the same realm as well because they're demons, right? So I say that they do make more sense than Lee May's placement here. And then finally, this section here, I just feel like this one is off right here, right? I feel like we could have either put Sindel up here, you know, with the rest of the royal family and guard. You could have put Lee May right here next to, if you wanted to keep Reiko in, you could have been like Lee May, Reiko, Shao Kahn, and Sindel, or something like that, right? I don't know what the sense was in terms of building the last base roster. I know in terms of story, in my opinion, I feel like, especially Quan Chi, if anyone deserves a base roster spot, it should have been Quan Chi, since he played such a huge role throughout the entire second half of the game. I'd be curious to find out what the developers thought when building the roster spots, because again, when I look at this base roster here on MK11, I just feel like it makes sense to the entire storyline of what we saw in MK11. I think I'm going to cut this video at that point. Let me know what you're thinking in terms of the story relationship into what we received in the base roster. Do you think Quan Chi and Ermac maybe deserved more of a role on this particular base roster? Personally think that Havik, Nitarra, Reiko, and Rain just didn't have a strong enough role to deserve a spot on the main roster. So yeah, thanks for watching, and we'll catch you in the next video.